I'm Michael Govan, the director of the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. It's a pleasure to welcome you to another in our series of Directors' Conversations. And we are thrilled tonight to have with us Rocco Landesman, the chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts. Given the interest of time, because I know there's a huge traffic jam, so we've lost people and people are late, and Mr. Landesman, Chairman Landesman, has to leave precisely at 8:30. So I will abbreviate the laudatory introduction that I had hoped to give entirely, because not only following his successful Broadway theater producing career, many Tony Award-winning shows under his belt, including Big River, Angels in America, and The Producers. He is a very successful person in our art world in general, but he took the job on to be head of, as some people in the art world call it, sometimes the beleaguered National Endowment for the Arts, because it's been through trials and tribulations. He took it on with great enthusiasm, and under his chairmanship, the organization is awarded nearly $139 million in grants, and I think he will be here. That's part of $4 billion in grants since the National Endowment was started in 1965. There are many, many accomplishments of the endowment, I think, that we all feel proud of. I mean, recently, and we're part of, for example, Blue Star Museums, offering free admission to active duty military personnel, that kind of outreach, to all of the exhibitions and programs that the National Endowment runs. And we know as a museum, we want that imprimatur, because we know they go through a rigorous process of approving a grant and thinking about its benefit to the public, and that's what we care about from the National Endowment. There's so many programs. The previous leader of the endowment, of course, many of you know Dana Gioia, who's was from here in Hawthorne, and a poet. Shakespeare in American Communities is one that I know about. And to abbreviate this and get right to the point, one of the most important new initiatives of the NEA that Chairman Landesman has overseen, and I know it's close to his heart, is the Our Town program. There are 2 grants in Los Angeles that are part of that, and I'm going to be asking Rocco to speak a little bit about that. So I know there are many great friends and people here, so without further ado, I will introduce Rocco Landesman, Chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts. We did a whirlwind tour of the museum, so he's still running.
Yes, the fast forward version. Boom, 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 boom.
And I like that it's you wearing cowboy boots instead of me tonight. I didn't wear mine. So I really wanted to talk about a few topics. I know time is short, so we'll speak quickly. But I've been fascinated. I was fascinated from the moment it was started and we got a call about the Our Town program, and I'm really interested about your passion for that program. There's 2 grants, right, that are here in Los Angeles, and one that we have been involved in. I know Olga Garay, who's here from the mayor's office. Hi, Olga. Thank you for being here. Has been working, submitted a grant for the corridor related to the Watts Towers, and I know you visited today. So I have some slides of some of the projects, and I wondered if you could tell us about your passion for this particular program and how it functions.
Sure. Well, I had never been to Watts. I had never seen the Watts Towers. I'd seen pictures only. And what is immediately apparent is how much they're part of a real community. And what this does ultimately for not only for the economy of the community, and they have very ambitious plans to make it more of a tourist attraction to bring people through, but just in terms of the very visceral pride that people in that neighborhood have, and it's because of a work of art, a very iconic and original and actually really unique work of art. And it's wonderful to see, because we at the NEA in these last few years have been really interested. Our focus has been what I like to think of as the intersection of the arts and the real world. Art as it relates to communities, neighborhoods, cities, people's real lives. And you don't see a better example of that than you see in that neighborhood in Watts. And it's very encouraging. It's thrilling to see it, and it's fantastic to see that you guys, that LACMA is there in force, and are a big part of that. I mean, to a great extent, the Our Town program, this whole notion of creative placemaking, is really to bring into the national discussion and international policy, what you guys have been doing now for some number of years. It happened in Beacon with DIA. It's happened all around the country, and we need to show that off, to formalize it, to make it a part of national policy.
I wonder if you could say a little more about that. You used the word pride, and we were talking a little bit earlier, and so often people jump right to the issues of it's all about the economy, and if you can use the arts to fuel the economy, that's important. And I think, well, isn't that a little bit backwards? Don't we have an economy to achieve things as people and in the arts? And you've actually taken a different spin on that in terms of even the word you used, pride, I think.
Yes, I mean, we were talking earlier about Beacon, which was a pretty downtrodden and depressed place. Suddenly you have DIA there, and people are proud to be from there. If they say they're from Beacon, the first thing they'll say is DIA. We've got one of the most famous museums in the world. It creates a sense of place, a sense of pride in your place, and that has an incalculable effect on the fabric of that community. People will tend to want to stay there. Will want to go there. And our whole point at the NEA, and this didn't start with us, Richard Florida, others have been talking about it, that if you bring art and artists into a town, into a city, into a place, it changes the entire ethos of that place. It changes the perception. And that has an effect on the economy, on the social fabric, on things as that you wouldn't think of, like juvenile delinquency and truancy. Throughout the whole, people, we know that through a lot of data, that when there's arts in a neighborhood, in a community, there are demonstrably lower levels of juvenile delinquency and truancy, much higher levels of civic engagement. People are more likely to vote, to join other organizations, to be part of a social discourse and cohesion. And of course, there's the economic benefit as well, which is important also.
Yeah, I think it's so great that that those are the values. I mean, I know that we were involved in Watts for, well, many reasons. One is that the Watts Towers, I think, are one of the great works of art anywhere, and so their preservation is of paramount importance to all of us as people who benefit from them. And I had also hoped that the experience of that sense of community would be expanded. I mean, we are the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and I often say that doesn't mean just Wilshire and Fairfax. Like, it's right. The county, and of course, the kids that come from various schools and love to come to the museum. We're in District 4 and District 7 schools, and I think that I often feel that especially in a down economy, museums and institutions have a hunker down mentality to just keep your doors open. And I think what the Art Town grants have done is said there's a high priority to thinking about how art affects everyday life.
I remember a conversation I had with Jack Reed, the senator from Rhode Island, who's the chair of our Appropriations Committee, the Senate Interior Appropriations. Early on, he said, if you're going to gain any traction for your agenda, you have to connect what you're doing with things that people care about, that are important to them. And I think part of that, and certainly in the case of artistic institutions, museums certainly, it's a question of not just being that big temple on the hill that's rather right. forbidding and scary to people. It's getting out and around. And boy, you're getting out and around in Watts and other places. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole issue, and this is a digression, but I think it's a digression worth having. My background, as you mentioned, is in the performing arts. Well, when you go to any performing arts event, what your encounter with the art is happening live at that moment in that place with those actors, and that's an event where there's an audience and there's a certain amount of time where it's taking place. And in the performing arts, it's all in the present moment. You're going to see a dance or a ballet, a dance or an opera, a theater piece, or a symphony performance or whatever. Museums are different. Museums are odd kinds of, as I was saying before, accretors of wealth. They build collections. They acquire more and more and more objects. Now, they don't have room to store the objects, so they put them in the basement. And 90% of the objects are in the basement. And it's a weird kind of arts engagement for me to encounter coming out of a different world, to see institutions that are basically building more and more wealth, but not necessarily having a present tense engagement with the world. And I think, and I'm not just saying this because you're here next to me, Michael, I've been saying it everywhere around the country, I think what you're doing here at LACMA is a model for what I think every museum in the country should be doing. If you're going to be more than a wealth accreter, more than a collector, there are a couple of things that you have to do. You have to engage not only the work of the artist as a collection, you have to engage the artist himself or herself. You have to be dedicated to the people who are creating this work, number one, and you've made that a special point of yours. And the other is you have to be engaged in the community. You have to figure out, we're in a particular place in the United States, in this county, in this city. And what are we going to do to engage that place, to have a real relationship with the people who are in our community, who are next door. And when I toured the Watts Towers today in that community and saw the work that you've done there and that you've engaged, it was thrilling to me, it was heartening, and made me very, very encouraged and optimistic about what arts institutions might do if they have a little bit of different perspective and different vision.
Well, and I mean, being very honest, I think the hope is that we learn from what the community is doing itself too, because, I mean, when you go to the Watts Coffee House, which is a business that's been started there for the community, for the neighborhood, and I brought my UCLA class there, and you could just see the connection that all of a sudden the art, the work, conservation, the artist's work, a community, a business, seem to work together. And I guess I myself have, as I've seen the Our Town grants, started to really see that value. I mean, I don't know if you'd be willing to say a few words about some of the other, well, these are the Watts Towers, everybody.
Well, the thing that's amazing to me, of
beautiful
course, is that this is all done by one person, by hand.
Yeah.
I mean, this was not any kind of collective effort. This is one guy's vision, and you could not have a more personal work of art. Every piece of it was done by him.
Right, and the point of the Our Town grant, just that was received by the city of Los Angeles in collaboration with many of us who are there, is to create a corridor to the public transportation, so that there is accessibility, but it's also a park-like benefit to the neighborhood in total, and will create sense of place.
And when you arrive at that station, you almost have to, you want to walk down that walk because it's so aesthetic, because it's so welcoming, and I think it's a tremendous project.
There are many other, because I was preparing, I was reading about several of the other projects, including this one in Willowbrook, and I don't know if...
I was there this afternoon.
Yeah. Can you, since I haven't been, you can say something about the Willowbrook project.
Well, there's a big development going on in Willowbrook, and it's anchored by this Martin Luther King Jr. Hospital. And I got some of the history. It was built in the 70s, and it was terrible, and now they're building a completely new one. And there are a lot of aspects to this in the community. There are obviously health aspects, transportation, education, and the feeling was, well, shouldn't there be an aesthetic component to it? Shouldn't the arts be present at the table there? And so we made a grant for the design of some programs to develop some ideas about how art might be included in this venture. I mean, one of the things we know is if you go to the Mayo Clinic, you see it. When there's an environment that is aesthetic, that's pleasing, that's engaging to the eye and ear, outcomes are better. Not only patient outcomes, but staff and doctors want to be in a place that has aesthetic value, and we feel that we need to mix an aesthetic component in. We're doing what I think is a very, very important joint project with the Department of Health and Human Services, my friend Kathleen Sebelius, where it became apparent to me that when you look at her portfolio, there are so many intersections with the arts, or where the arts can play a major role. Childhood development and early cognition, obviously, where there's been a lot of research about the value of music and art generally. Mental health, substance abuse, geriatrics. The arts have a major role to play in this. And Kathleen and I had a convening of the experts in this field. We worked up a white paper together, and we now have an agenda where we're going to work together. And her budget's a little bigger than mine. It's $900 billion. So
this is good.
This is
You're
good.
getting.
This is good, and we're doing that with all the federal agencies. I'm trying to rob Peter to pay ourselves. And
But isn't that the crux of the issue? I mean, the fact is that for some reason, and I do attribute it maybe to the youth of the nation, that we are still with 200 and something years young, but that how is it that the arts are perceived in our country and mostly in politics as extracurricular? It just seems there's so much data
Elitist.
and science.
Right.
You've published report after report that shows that kids stay in school, that health benefits, and yet people will say, oh, well, that's the extra activity. How do you change
and it's
that?
the first thing, when you have a budget crisis, the first thing cut out of the schools
What
is the arts.
Why is that?
I think people are distrustful. They view it as something that rich people do that doesn't apply to them. That it's elitist. There are also I think connotations to it where people think that it's left wing. There's a long history of art, of activist and political art. People are suspicious of it for all kinds of reasons, and they think it's not a necessity, that it's an extra. Well, it's not an extra. Every human society in the history of the world has had art. It's a universal. Just like they've had shelter and food and reproduction, every society has had art. So it's not an add-on at all, and it's important to make that point.
Yeah, I mean, I also feel
It's not in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, there's the everyday benefit. There's also the sense that a culture that values itself, let's say that we are a strong nation, you're the National Endowment for the Arts, if you want to communicate the values that we've worked hard to research and establish, and we want to communicate those across long stretches of time, that is the way we do it. We do it through art. Societies have shown how they've been able to, only way to embed values and ideas over long stretches of time is through art.
Art is who we are. It's not only the record that we have of other civilizations. What we know about civilizations from the earliest ones on are their art. It's through their art that we know them. That's what's survived, not the various mercantile relationships that go on. But there's that famous story during the war when they went to Winston Churchill and they said, we have no money. We're completely broke. Why are we still funding the arts? We should cut out the federal funding for the arts, which in England has always been very significant. And Churchill said, well, what are we fighting for?
And to ask a direct question, many people have compared the U.S. system, which is a private philanthropy system, to systems in Europe or, for example, in Canada, where artists receive many direct grants, where there's, and everyone has had this discussion, like, well, but then it becomes a handout and we're supporting artists who aren't as great, or that isn't it amazing that American art has literally thrived and it's as popular and important as any art in the world without federal funding. Is it strategic, or is it just that we can't get money and so that's the reality of promoting it in a good way?
Well, it's shameful that we don't have bigger, much more significant public support of the arts. I mean, our situation is literally embarrassing compared to the rest of the developed world. England, that we were just talking about, is the worst funder in Europe of the arts, public funder, by far the worst. And their arts budget is $900 million. Ours is $150 million. If you transferred their budget to our country, we would have an arts budget of $4.6 billion. And France, it's $2.3 billion. So we are way behind the curve there. And what the answer always, as you just said, is, well, we have very strong private philanthropic support for the arts. Our system is not a federal funding system. Well, there are two problems with that. One is what happens when you had what happened here in 2008 and 2009, when suddenly everybody at once stops writing checks, and the assets of foundations literally overnight lose 40% of their value. So their giving over the next 3-5 years is down by 30-40%, and artists and institutions who've been depending on those in the private sector suddenly see the money evaporate and they go out of business. There's no sustained, reliable source of funding that only the federal government or federal and state and local governments can provide. They provide the assurance that there's going to be some continuity, that you're not going to, a lot of theaters and arts organizations in the last couple of years have gone out of business, have closed their doors. That wouldn't be the case if we had a stronger federal funding system. The second aspect, and this is equally important, if not more important for me, is that support for the arts cannot be entirely left to the marketplace. And I don't mean just commercial, non-commercial, that art should be able to pay its own way, and if you can sell it as a movie or a best-selling book or whatever, or a painter paints something and it goes way up in value and joins the market, the gallery's sponsored and joins the marketplace. That can't be the only thing that we value in this country, is what the marketplace perceives as of value. And the fact is that it's not just the marketplace is not just the commercial arena, it's also what the private sector at any given moment feels is worthwhile, is according to its current manners or fashion or style. And we cannot leave our artistic heritage to the marketplace, in my opinion.
So I know partly I think you were chosen to be chairman for many reasons, but I sense it was partly that you could communicate across those lines to pragmatic people and business people the value of the arts, because you've had a role in the private sector. Do you feel and you're as articulate as anyone I've ever heard on this topic, do you feel it's
I'm sure it's not true.
working? I know we have an increase this year. Do you feel that we're pulling our weight as museums and citizens? Do you feel that there's something not being done to make this very obvious case?
I think you're doing a better job than ever. I think we're now making the case to politicians that there are significant constituents in their districts for the arts. That there are theaters and museums and organizations that are important parts of the community and do organize and vote and do all of that. But I do think we're making, for that reason and others, some real progress. I've now been through 2 budget cycles in Washington. In the first one, when the funding for the NEA came up, and whatever the funding is, the House of Representatives, which is controlled by the Republicans, immediately vote to slash it. And the House committee took us down to a certain number, and then there was an amendment introduced on the House floor to cut that by another $20 million. And that motion was passed in the House in the first budget cycle, with 22 Republicans voting no, voting against the amendment to slash the NEA funding. In this last budget cycle, same thing happened again. Amendment was introduced, slashed the NEA funding by even more. This time it was defeated with 50 Republican nay votes. That's a big change in a short time in the House, and I believe that we're beginning to turn the thing around. We have an increased appropriation coming from the administration in the new budget, and I'm encouraged that we're seeing some progress.
Yeah, I mean, I know that possibility is there. I have to say, just to say politically, I feel like when it's public, it votes. Republicans tend to be against the NEA and funding for the arts in that sense, and the Democrats tend to say they're for it. However, my personal experience has been in private, when it came down to allocating money, I found the Republicans that I've ever worked with, but Governor Pataki, for example, who publicly wouldn't say a word about it, but behind the scenes made sure Dia Beacon happened. And I find that this is an interesting thing where there's a rhetoric on the outside, but if you peel away that layer, you find that a lot of even the Republican Party says, well, gee, it's investing in our community, it's aspirational, and it's a public-private partnership. So it has all the touchdowns of what's great about what we're presenting.
And sometimes, amazingly, they even go public with that. I mean, the House chair of our Appropriations Committee, a guy named Mike Simpson, a congressman from Idaho, has been a tremendous supporter of the arts and has been a great friend of the NEA. And during this last budget process, some House members got on the floor and said, the NEA is out there promoting sacrilegious art and blasphemous art and pornography. And Mike Simpson got up on the floor of the House and said, well, that's not true. That's, you're confusing the NEA with other...
With LACMA or somebody.
Those other guys.
And McGetty.
But he did take a public position on the House floor saying, saying what you're saying isn't true.
We have a few slides. Are there highlights? I know we're short on time, but I wonder if there are highlights that you want to just give us a sense of the diversity? I know this is Boise, Idaho.
Well, this is Mike Simpson's home district.
Right.
This is in Boise. You know, the fact that a major dance company, the Trey McIntyre Dance Company, is in Boise, and we gave them a grant to be able to do community work and community outreach in Boise, so where they don't have to tour around the country as much. But this is, you know, right out of the NEA's playbook, because this is something that's not New York City or Los Angeles or Chicago, but Boise, Idaho, where important work is being done.
Right, and it is being done. I often
Yes.
say at our Association of Art Museum Director meetings is that when we lobby, New York and LA should just lay low, because
That's right.
it's actually true that there are, you know, spectacular cultural events all over
Absolutely
the
right.
country, and it gets over politicized quickly when you emphasize. And obviously, there are Los Angeles is like a whole world, so you have LA and other worlds in Watson and in Willowbrook and other places. There are projects in this is Charleston, South Carolina, where
Mayor Riley is one of the pioneers of creative placemaking and is a great arts mayor.
and so is this his initiative, and,
Yes.
and the mayor coming to you in this case?
That's,
So a
Ma-
lot
that's
of the
Mayor, Mayor Riley, totally.
So it's interesting. In this case, even the Art Town grant is coming from the cities, right, to the NEA instead of, you know, museums or.
You mean the applications?
Yeah.
Yes, in many cases, yeah.
And that's a bit unique. That's not so often been true in the past. It's been mostly cultural organizations. Is that also
Right. Well,
strategic?
in the Art Town grants, there has to be a public component to it, whether it's a local arts council or governmental organization or entity or something. And that's you know, that's new.
This is let's see. I don't have all the slides. We have Columbus, Ohio. Oh, this is
Oh, Dubuque. I was in
this
Dubuque
is
recently.
this is
right.
Detroit. No, this is
Dubuque.
right. We just passed Detroit.
Yeah.
Do you want to go back to Detroit, or we can talk about Dubuque? Yeah.
Well,
this is
Dubuque,
Iowa.
they've taken all these old warehouses that have fallen into disuse, and they're creating an arts district. In the center of Dubuque, there's performance spaces and galleries and museum space, and it's transforming Dubuque. And this is creative placemaking. This is exactly what we're talking about. And I was just there a few weeks ago.
I mean, I often feel like it's the real estate community that should thank the artists. I mean, Soho being the greatest example, but there are no better real estate developers in the entire world than artists, right?
Yes, and of course, you know, we always get the questions of you know, gentrification. And I remember I was with Sean Donovan, the Secretary of HUD in Baltimore, and HUD was providing money for some artist housing in an area that was so tough you couldn't believe it. I mean, this is a brutal neighborhood, and so now artist housing is going to go up. And I said to the mayor of Baltimore, I said, well, what about gentrification? And she said, please God. I mean, let's revitalize the neighborhood first. Right. You know, not every neighborhood is going to end up like Soho.
You have Fargo. I was looking at the list. Fargo, North Dakota. There is
you know, water retention pools, and the idea is, why should the water retention pools in Fargo, which are all over the place because they have severe flooding, well, why should they be ugly?
Right.
Why can't they be aesthetic? Why can't they have an artistic component? So we gave them a grant to make them unugly.
You know, it's funny. I wonder how many are artist-driven. I know in the 70s, for me, I was so attracted to that generation of artists who felt there was no difference between making art and improving the physical world. And I mean, LACMA in the 80s, I forget, did a beautiful show by Helen and Newton Harrison, who teach at UCSD. And they've been the greatest proponents of not only trying to avoid global warming with environmental art projects, but I think it's often artists who have been ahead of the curve in seeing this cultural. I mean, I always say we protect nature. Nature doesn't protect itself.
Right.
Why would we be convinced to protect nature? Yes, for self-preservation, but it's through art and culture, that lens that we learn, you know, why, and we develop that desire. It seems arts can be part of that.
Artists care about beauty, and they have to be the leaders in this.
This is Memphis, Tennessee, and I know the project goes to New Haven, Connecticut.
Where I spent 8 years of my life.
And this is storefront projects, right?
Well,
So this is more
New Haven's
urban.
a lot more prettier and more aesthetic now than when I was there.
Um, uh, Providence, Rhode Island. So all of these are, I see the repetition of plazas, sense of place, neighborhoods, revitalization of urban centers. This is the theme,
there's
obviously.
as you can see from in a lot of it, there's a strong design element in this, and in fact, our town is part of the design discipline at the NEA. But what a lot of these things have in common is that they are in fact public. People engage the arts without realizing it all the time. You can, if you live in Watts, or if you're in that plaza in Providence, Rhode Island, or if you're in downtown Memphis and these great new buildings are going up, you're engaging the aesthetic world and the arts every single day by walking down the street. Right. You don't have to buy a ticket to a play or go to a museum. The quality of your life, the quality of your daily daily life can be greatly improved by having an aesthetic dimension where you live. It doesn't have to be just one run-on mall.
And so what was the criteria? Because there must have been a
Here's
million.
Simpson. Yeah. Right.
This is
This is Wilson, North Carolina, and Wallace Simpson might be 90 years old now. I don't know. He's an old guy, but he'd been doing these whirly gigs, these bizarre structures, and he's an idiosyncratic guy. Nobody does anything like what he does, and the city of Wilson is going to actually bring those downtown, create a park, create a place where people can come in. It's going to be a tremendous tourist attraction. It's going to transform the economy of that town of Wilson, and his work will be much more accessible to a much larger public. And it's another perfect example of creative placemaking and how it can transform a place in a community.
Maybe to switch topics, because I know we're again short on time. A lot of what the NEA did after the famous Mapplethorpe controversy was run the other direction. And I think, as you were just saying, people now have been able to stand up and say, well, that's just a tiny fraction, tiny fraction of the massive good that the NEA and the arts do in the nation. And obviously these little moments, I mean, that was for whatever reason, it was Robert Mapplethorpe and the Piss Christ that set everybody off on this crusade. And again, I think the natural reaction has been recently of politicians, well, let's just not talk about that. Let's push it to the side and let's make the case that 99.9% of what we do isn't that. I want to ask a more direct question. Now that we've acquired the Mapplethorpe archive here between LACMA and the Getty and made it a civic priority, so this renegade artist who was considered an outsider has gone totally mainstream, has been shown at the Uffizi in Florence. How do we make the case that we shouldn't shy away, that one of the things the nation's built on is many voices, and that we need to, it's the Socratic gadfly, it's all of that democratic and philosophical traditions that artists play a role in, that art is not always just beautification, provocation can be education. Is that something you're willing to engage? Can we do that
in the very first speech I gave when I became chairman of the NEA, I went to a conference in Brooklyn for an organization called Grant Makers in the Arts. And I gave a talk and I said that the days of the defensive NEA are over. They're history. We're not going to be defensive about what we're doing, about what we're supporting. And art has always had a dual function. Art has been, on the one hand, a celebration and an affirmation of a community's values, a message of continuity for the culture of a people and of a community, and has reaffirmed and consoled and validated the community's history and values. Art has always done that, but but there's another tradition that is equally important, which is to challenge and to bring about a different perspective, to bring a new voice and a new vision to people, and to make them question their values, their traditions, their assumptions, their received wisdom. And the greatest kind of art will leave you feeling often very alarmed, disconcerted, challenged, upset even sometimes. That's a very, very important function of art. And if we are truly the National Endowment for the Arts, we can't back away from that aspect of it as well.
I wonder if there's a way to make the case. I mean, we recently showed Ed Kienholz's 5-card stud, I think, and it was a really revelatory experience for all of us. It was controversial going into the project. The LA Times wrote an editorial, a very important editorial as it was going up, that the piece was not about the specifics of, it had the specifics of what it was dramatizing, but it reminded us that intolerance and prejudice still exist, and atrocity in our world. And I guess, I don't know if there's a case to be made that museums are a safe place where thoughtful consideration, where we always have warning labels. I wonder if
attendance is voluntary in a museum as opposed to say television.
That's right, as opposed to television. And I wonder if there's a case to be made that we can work these things out. We can have critical discourse. We can have the Socratic gadfly. I mean, Kienholz was the most critical of America and its kind of two-facedness is what he thought. He moved to Europe at one point in the end because of that anger he felt. That can't we make the case that these things need to be worked out in places where there's free discussion, where there is, where it is voluntary, and where people can engage it?
It's one of the great values of a space like this, where you can come and freely engage this discussion. It's important.
So is even the Art Town program open to sort of placemaking, to be controversial, to be discursive in that, and can we
to challenge assumptions.
And to challenge assumptions.
Absolutely, I think it should be.
And are there? Do you feel there are champions for that in Washington other than yourself?
Yes, we
got one.
I have the support of the administration,
right.
And I've been very encouraged by that, and I think that there are. I think people understand that one of the great values of art is to question received wisdom and assumptions and to challenge us, and that needs to be supported.
To get down back on the ground in Los Angeles, I just wanted to throw up just to end with a few slides about what I think is one of the key issues, which is issues of art and education. We recently did a show, I'll show a slide, in Charles White Elementary School, but these amazing statistics of our changing demographic. We had the Mexican ambassador to the US here talking to our board last week, and we were talking about the difference in Mexican values and US values, and in a way, Mexico's a place rich with culture, it's assumed, and in the US, it doesn't have the same role in everyday life. But there's real challenges in Los Angeles and in this world as we see the changing demographic. These are just some statistics that 73% of the total students in LAUSD are Hispanic or Latino.
Wow.
We started looking at our education programs and realizing that these kids are learning, they're not learning just the subjects, they're learning to speak English. And one of our curators, Jose Luis Blondet, who was actually formerly director of education at the museum in Caracas, where he grew up and then got a degree in New York and worked for me at Beacon, we've done a show at Charles White Elementary School. There's a space there that we've been programming, and he did this amazing exhibition called A is for Zebra, that was about this idea that for early learners and for kids trying to get to English, that images are really an interesting way to do that, and that it's about making sense of language and making nonsense. The show starts with this famous video by John Baldessari where he is teaching a plant the alphabet and sparing no details. And that is juxtaposed with Goya, Francesco Goya's famous prints that we own of the donkey teaching the donkey the alphabet with little donkey alphabets. I wonder, you have a lot of statistics in the NEA's research that show that if you include arts as part of basic education, not extracurricular, but you include this as ways to think about language, to have pictures as part of that, that you improve learning, retention. But I never hear it.
The kids tend to stay in school for one thing.
They stay in school, but I don't hear it outside of the NEA website and all those beautiful reports that you publish. Do you think it's never part of the education dialogue on the front pages of the paper?
Arnie Duncan has been a big supporter and gets this and has been advancing the cause of arts education. And now arts are now a metric in a new program of Department of Education called Promised Neighborhoods, where the arts are the first time a metric for evaluation on these grants. So that I think we're making some progress there. But it's a fight that has to be waged. It's hand-to-hand combat day by day. Most of education funding is not from the Department of Education, but it's from counties and localities in the states. So it's a case we just have to keep making over and over again. But it just seems so stupidly obvious to me that we can't just be training teachers to train students to perform on standardized tests in 2 subjects. Right. I mean, that's leaving a lot of childs behind. And I'm starting to call it no test left behind. But that probably got me in trouble somewhere. But the arts, obviously, and we all know this here, catch a lot of these kids who otherwise wouldn't, talk to Robert Redford, who without the arts, where would he be? And that's true of so many people. And the arts are an avenue for expression and for not only for careers, but for a lifetime of engagement and enjoyment for so many people, and it should be part of the basic curriculum of schools. It's obvious.
Olga knows this, but we've been talking with the mayor's office because I guess it's a strong belief of mine that, okay, even if testing is there, we know that actually creative thinking helps with test scores, that you take the approach to problem solving, which the arts give, rather than rote information. And, the modest proposal we were talking about, or we were trying to put out there, is like, maybe because there's been such success with arts-based curricula, which is that you don't add arts as another subject, but you can teach social sciences, you can teach math, you can teach science with an arts bias. And I always think that a lot of the management solutions for education are ill-founded, because in my business, I know that you need images and you need to persuade, not to just show them that it's more efficient. And I guess the modest proposal is LA is maybe a city to invest in this sense, because there's no other city you can make the case more that if you can paint, you can draw, you can sing, you can play an instrument, you can take a photograph, you can get a job. And I guess the modest proposal is, why not use LA as the test bed for making arts a central part of our public education, a core part for many reasons: creative thinking, innovation, competitiveness, staying in school, and I suppose you could say an LA job training.
Yes, LA is the creative economy writ very, very large. I mean, that's true, and arts should be part of the curriculum of every school here, without a doubt.
So we'll be applying for a major grant of several $100 million that you can work out with your friends over in education.
Right, exactly. We'll take it to the guys who have all the money.
We had so much more to talk about tonight, but I am very sensitive to your schedule.
Thanks.
And I know you have to leave. You've been so generous with your time and to be here in Los Angeles. So I want to thank you. And I have one
Michael.
small detail. So Melissa Shriver, are you here, Melissa? Where are you?
I know she's here. I talked to her earlier tonight.
Where is she? There she is, out of the shadows. Melissa Shriver, chair of the California Arts Council.
Craig Watson, who you spent the whole day with, I
did.
hear, our executive director at the California Arts Council, and I were in Washington, D.C. in December of last year, and we were advocating for the money for the NEA. And we found that many people had no idea really what the NEA is doing. So we spent a lot of our time telling people about how the NEA is doing all these incredible things in education, in equity and access, reaching underserved communities, and people were kind of stunned. They had no idea that 40% off the top of the budget goes to the states, which is a very federalist model, and if you're talking about our very conservative friends in the House in particular. So we had a wonderful experience there, and we educated a lot of people about the NEA. And so one of the things we talked about was how the NEA leverages investment, which is a big thing that we do at the California Arts Council. The NEA funds the California Arts Council, which is then matched by the state's general fund. And then we have an earned income project, which we're very excited about, which is our arts license plate. And the enabling legislation on that specifies that it goes to arts education. So to your wonderful conversation about the importance of arts ed. We feel that this is a good way to excite government about funding the arts, that, okay, we're going to maximize your investment. So Wayne Thiebaud designed our California Arts license plate, and we're promoting it, and the money, like I said, goes to arts education programming in the state of California. So, in honor of Rocco's visit to California, this is California Week. For all of you who don't know, if you look at the NEA Facebook page, California is occupying the NEA Facebook page this week. So,
Taking it over.
we would like Rocco to become a California Arts driver.
Wow.
See? And she's got the sports car to go with it, is outside.
I have no idea.
Now, so when you move here, you'll have a nice plate for your car.
Show the plate. You got to show the plate. So, okay, your sports getaway car is ready for the plates and right outside. We thank you, Rocco, for being here and taking all this time. Really, thank you.